Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. This week's video is about a game that recently just wrapped up. It released episodically, but it's seemingly taken the internet by storm, or at least the part of the internet that I'm on. And that would be Dispatch. Dispatch is made by some of the people who brought you some amazing Telltale games such as The Wolf Among Us and The Walking Dead series. The game follows the exact same formula and style as those Telltale games. You play as Robert, who through a series of events needs help repairing his suit, he's a superhero himself called Mecha Man, and winds up working at a superhero dispatch network, where he needs to help develop this ragtag group of former villains into acceptable, good, honest superheroes. This video is going to be a discussion and review of all aspects of the game, between the visuals, the stories, the character beats themselves, things like that. And this isn't going to be a video where I just talk about how great it is for however long I talk for. As much as I love it, I am also going to address what I think is its greatest strength, but it also turns into its greatest weakness, and that being simply the genre that it's set in. But before I begin, this video will contain spoilers, as we're going to be discussing the themes, the character arcs, the motivations, things like that. While it won't be a beat-by-beat overview, it will be just an all-encompassing breakdown and discussion of the game, so huge spoiler warning. To start off with the visuals and the music, I have to say they're both great. The music sticks out to me because the licensed parts actually work really, really well. I know that in some movies and TV shows, when they have a needle drop with some licensed music, it usually doesn't work out very well. But I felt that the pieces that they chose for this game actually worked really, really well. And I've specifically added like radio to my Spotify playlist. The visual style takes some input from previous Telltale games, but has a very new spin on it. What I mean is that with previous Telltale games such as The Walking Dead or Wolf Among Us, it's very clearly supposed to look like a comic book style. This game goes a little softer on the character designs and looks more like something out of a cartoon, like Invincible. They do a great job of mixing the 3D and 2D elements to emulate that cartoon style. And it's clear that they're using a lot of the same tricks that you would see in those kinds of animated TV shows, with the mixture of certain things in the foreground, the background. This is obviously flat, this is 3D, this is, also the difference in frame rates at certain points in the game also help with that visual style of making it feel like a very well done TV show. However, despite this cartoony look that it has, I think it still manages to carry a lot of weight with it. Antagonists are intimidating, the power behind these heroes is very clearly felt in the action sequences, and also those action sequences are beautifully animated. I think we can all agree on that. The choreography of it, I don't know if you can call it choreography since it's not real people, but the staging and the combat, the motion, it's all incredible. And it's clear that in those sections, as well as all aspects of the game really, there's a lot of detail put into every shot and the environment itself. They also use a lot of editing tricks for jokes or for big impact in certain scenes that I really love to see. Whether it's matching the motion of opening the ketchup packet to ripping out someone's augmented eye, or things like that during the flashback to the bar brawl, or something far more simple like the repeated shots of Robert at the beginning suiting up as Mecha Man and then Robert at the end mirroring the journey that you've been on and sort of coming full circle. Both of those work very well, and it's nice to see a game that is so cinematic and so intentional with its shots versus what you would get in a normal Telltale game where it's a little more flat and a little more static. I think the lighting is very well used. The uses of reds, blues, purples, yellows, all of those different lighting techniques and angles and things like that feel great, and they really elevate the cinematic nature of it, I guess you could say. To get into the gameplay, first things first, there are no open walking around sections in this game. Sections like in the earlier Telltale games where you're able to walk around, pick up items, and interact with them in between the more closed-off cutscenes. You don't get any of that in this game, and at first I was a little disappointed because it did feel kind of limiting at first. However, when I continued to think about it, You can either have a far more open game or you can have a far more cinematic game. And I think for the goal of this particular story, the kind of story that the writers were aiming for, this much more closed off cinematic version suits it a lot better. The other thing is I think it also allows the animations to have a lot more care and effort put into them. I feel like in some of the other Telltale games, the stiff animations and things like that become very, very evident. It's not a game series that's typically animated with motion capture like the later Life is Strange games. So the fact that they're able to focus more on those animations rather than building these open areas, I think also lends not only to the cinematic part, but also to the characterization and things like that. And if that's the trade-off, like I said, I am more than fine with that. The two big gameplay mechanics outside of QTEs, which we will get to, and the dispatching minigame themselves. I saw a great post from somebody online who I follow, I'll put like his name and everything here, talking about the dispatching mode itself and how he feels that it should be its own little roguelike mode, something to play in between the release of episodes or just even just a little side game that you can play within Dispatch. Because really, it is fun. The way dispatching works is you've got your Z team and you sit at your computer and various issues and problems will show up around the city. You need to decide which heroes should go to solve what problems. You've got to consider not only their powers and their personality, but also their statistics. What's their charisma? What's their strength? Things like that. From there, it's sort of RNG. It depends on how much of the skill net your hero's skills take up, and then there's a random percentage that this little ball will land and it'll be like, this is a successful attempt and this is not. And so that might sound boring, but what makes it so fun is just the way that it's used throughout the story. The RNG aspect of it and the ability to send multiple heroes or only one on different missions really helps put pressure on the player and make this minigame that doesn't sound very intense on paper actually pretty intense. Because you have to consider, do I want to increase the chance of this being successful, but then I won't have a hero available for however long it'll take for these guys to complete that task and then come back and rest? And what if something pops up that I need them for and they're busy? It makes you consider all of those things, and as the difficulty ramps up, it can become pretty intense, like I said. The other thing I like is that this is a game that uses your expectations and then subverts them in order to elevate the story as well as the gameplay. Gameplay-wise, they set you into this routine. You think you know what you're doing, you know exactly what to expect, and then something out of the ordinary will happen. Whether a member of the Z team doesn't show up the next day because you had a negative interaction with them, or towards the end when it's a big cataclysmic event and the map pulls out and expands, or even at the end of that when the power goes out and you're sitting there going along doing your thing and then the computer shuts off. They do a great job of lulling you into that false sense of security and then upping the ante or throwing something new at you in order to make you go, okay, let me sit up in my chair and figure this out. I also think the gameplay growth and the way you grow these characters throughout the dispatching minigame really helps in the story. It feels like you are getting to know these people by listening to their mindless conversations, you're making them better at their jobs, and then sending them out to individual things. I think having that consistent gameplay element not only helps to hit home, hey, this is Robert's job, this is a day in the office, but also the relationship and the rapport that you're building with them. You almost learn to trust them more as they improve and grow. There is literally a numerical way to see that these people, these villains, are growing and changing and becoming better and taking steps forward to become heroes. And I think it really, really works. This is a good example of how to mix your gameplay and your story into one without it feeling disconnected. Now, one thing to be totally honest about, and this is an aspect of the game's greatest strength and greatest weakness, which we will talk more about in the story section, but that's that the RNG can be rigged at times. For example, in episode 4, after you cut a member, morale is kind of low among the group, and you're meant to have a pretty bad shift, all things considered. Yes, you can still succeed at things, but with the character's reaction to the shift itself after, as well as, in my personal opinion, and people I've spoken to who've played the game, it felt like nothing was going right that shift. It may sound frustrating to openly admit that it can be rigged against you at times, but I actually think that's a strength. because it helps you put yourself kind of in the mindset of Robert. It helps you really get into the story because you're thinking, darn, no matter what I do, I just can't seem to work this thing out. And it helps to create less of a disruption between the story and the gameplay. Think of something like The Last of Us. You're playing on easy mode, so you're mowing down enemies left and right. You've got, pounds and pounds of ammo and Molotovs and these bombs, all of these things, and you're just blowing everything away. And then it goes to the cutscene, and it's Ellie all sad, and they're talking about, we don't have any bullets, and survival is so hard out here, and blah, blah, blah. After you just wiped out 30 dudes by just chucking a bunch of Molotovs and nail bombs at them, it creates a huge disconnect between the narrative, the story world where we are struggling to survive, things are really bad right now, and then the gameplay where you're having a great time blowing people's heads off left and right. By rigging the game against you, it actually helps to enforce those story beats. But honestly, I'm glad that they did, because as I said, I think it aids the overall story and the overall arc that you're supposed to go on with Robert. Because as far as I know, you're never going to have like an amazing shift where everything goes right and then afterwards it cuts to Robert and he's like, ugh, these guys can't do anything right. That would feel wrong. But because it's kind of geared against you at points, and then kind of geared in your favor when things are supposed to be awesome and great, like obviously you can still mess up. It's not like they're putting full-on training wheels and you can't mess up. But overall, they try to sort of guide you through it. And like I said, while that might sound like a negative and make it sound like, oh, well, nothing I do really matters, which we'll kind of get into in a second, it still does matter, and it still aids in the story, especially on your first playthrough. You still want to do better. I also think that this helps in the end when you have that final push, that final big dispatch day where everything gets pulled out from underneath you, you get more heroes as the night goes, the map pulls back, and now you're taking care of a huge portion of LA. It feels like everything you've built, upgrading your crew, the relationships you've built with them, the abilities that you've gotten by having good shifts, it all comes together, everything you've learned in that moment, and works flawlessly. The hacking minigame is a little bit different. I enjoyed the hacking minigame, and I can also say with the hacking minigame, they do a great job of upping the difficulty slowly but surely, never to the point where it's impossible or you feel like you're stuck, but to the point that you're having to sit down and really pay attention. You can't just breeze through it. And I also think that it doesn't ever spike extremely in difficulty. I think the difficulty ramp up that you see is very gradual, and I think it introduces new elements and new ideas. It builds off of itself very, very well. And that does have consequences in the story. For example, being able to help Invisigal by hacking certain things. If you fail all your attempts, it'll show a different outcome, which overall the general story will stay the same, but the smaller things will change. And I keep bringing up the story, and it's because the gameplay and the story are so intertwined, it's difficult not to, but you know. But either way, both of these mini-games build on each other and implement new gameplay mechanics and difficulties in a very natural and very well done way. The quick time events are definitely a weak point of this gameplay side of things, because they don't really hold much weight on what happens. And the only difference is that sometimes a different animation won't even play at all, but at worst, a slightly different animation will play where you miss a punch or you get hit in the face or something along those lines. And I'm not saying that the entire game should be derailed because you missed one A prompt and now you can't progress the story and it sends you on a whole different route. I'm not saying they should have extreme weight like that, but in previous Telltale games we would see fail states, we would see deaths of characters, and then it would tell us to retry. I think that is something I would have really liked to see. And it would have been nice because it would have made you actually, kind of sit up and be like, okay, I need to actually pay attention to this. However, they do give you the option to just completely ignore the QTEs, which is fine. I mean, at least they're aware of the fact that they don't really hold that much weight, so they do give you that opportunity. So I think that's fine. Next, we're going to get into the characters. To start off with Robert, I love Robert. I think Robert is a great protagonist for this game. And I think Aaron Paul's performance as Robert is awesome. If you can't tell, I've got Saul Goodman back here. I love Better Call Saul. I like Breaking Bad, but I love Better Call Saul. So I'm very familiar with Aaron Paul, and I think he's a fantastic actor. And once again, he knocks it out of the park in this. Robert is a great example of just a blank slate enough, but he still has depth to him. They allude to his past and show enough flashbacks for you to like understand him and for you to feel like you know him, but they don't bog you down in lore dumps on this universe and his life. The great thing about him and his arc throughout the game is he mirrors the Z Team and Invisigal. And what I mean is that he's broken down. He goes from being a hero to making a difference to literally losing the one thing that makes him a hero in his worldview. And for him, his story is, can I be a hero again? There's a lot of talk of him doubting himself, doubting that he could ever be Mecha Man again. And there's several dialogue options where you can straight up say, he's not going to be Mecha Man anymore. And you can also, in the scene in the final episode when you've got Royd and Invisigal is handcuffed in the lab, when the Red Ring arrives, there's 3 different options for what Robert can say to quickly respond to it. And there's 2 that are very important. One is for him to grab his suit, and the other is for him to call the Z Team. And I think that the whole time he's doubting himself. He's doubting that he can be a hero again. He feels he's lost himself. And just like the Z Team, although they weren't heroes in the beginning, they are people who want to be better. And their whole arc is proving that they can be better, proving that no matter who you are, your background, what you've done, you can be forgiven and you can be better. It's a very Superman 2025 kind of feeling, I guess. And the other thing he learns is there's more to being a hero than just being Mecha Man. Through these relationships with the other characters, he learns that being a hero, being a good person, isn't just punching the bad guy. It's about accepting people for their faults and helping them improve, elevating those who are down, whether it's Waterboy, Phenomenon, whoever. If you're helping people and bringing people up, you're a hero. Seeing the way that he evolves with this group and that sort of found family camaraderie grows and changes is amazing. I think the acting and the performances, despite the fact that it was voiceover and odds are they may not have been in the same location for a lot of it, the chemistry, especially on Aaron Paul's part, was very, very clear. The next character we're going to be talking about is Beef. Beef. Moving on. No, I wasn't really going to talk about Beef, but I love Beef's addition. I think it's always great to have your little animated, non-talking sidekick within a story. And obviously I have a love of dogs, and I had my own Beef a few years back, so I definitely, it hit home that Robert, one of his closest confidants and people that he felt he could really talk to, was his dog. Because, you know, I've been there. When you're low and everything feels like it's lost, who can you rely on? It's usually your dog. Anyway, the real next character that we're going to discuss is Chase. The great thing about Chase, beyond just his performance, which is great, you're going to be hearing that a lot when I go over these characters, is saying that the performances are great, and it's because they are. But the great thing about him is that you get the best of 2 different comic book tropes. You get the mentor figure, and you get the old best friend. If this were Spider-Man, you would get a mixture of Uncle Ben as well as Ned. And he serves a very important part of the story. He is sort of the status quo that you need to break. He doesn't believe for a long time that the Z-Teamers even have a chance, especially Invisigal. However, through Robert's efforts and through the Z-Team's efforts, he has a change of heart and goes as far as to nearly sacrifice himself for a Z-Teamer, which I don't think he would ever, if you asked him at the beginning of the story, I don't think he would even consider putting his life on the line for any of these knuckleheads. There's also a great moment of foreshadowing with your final choice of whether to kill Shroud or not, if you get that ending, with him asking Robert, what are you going to do? Obviously, it seems that Chase wants you to take the mercy route. However, in my first playthrough, I said I didn't know what to do, because at the time, I genuinely didn't know what to do. And I like that his advice, rather than going into some big Uncle Ben monologue, he took more the role of the best friend. He said, look, you need to know, whatever it is, you need to know what it is you're going to do. And I thought that alone was a great interaction. Next up is Royd. Royd is a great side character, and apparently he was originally meant to be a Z-teamer, but he was reworked. His sort of comic book archetype is the scientist nerd guy, but obviously he's massive and a great fighter and all this and that. He's a great comedic relief. There's a lot of comedy in this game, but he is a great example of some of the lighter comedy within the game. Next, we're going to talk about Invisigal. Now, before I discuss Invisigal, and then next is going to be Blonde Blazer, I know I posted something on my Instagram, which, by the way, my Instagram and Twitter are below. I'm more active on my Instagram. You should go follow those. I posted a poll about, who's better, Invisigal or Blonde Blazer, and it was actually fairly tight. At first, it was Invisigal, and then it kind of bounced back to Blonde Blazer. And some of you may be wondering, who did I pick on my first playthrough? And while I fully believe that Malevola would be the best choice, I'm not going to interfere with her and Sonar's thing. He gets everything, doesn't he? Harvard graduate gets Malevola. I'm joking. Either way, but all jokes aside, I did go with Invisigal my first playthrough. Now, the thing with her is, some of you may disagree, she's written to be the heart of the game. She has the most time out of the Z team spent with Robert, and you really get to see that growth. And she sort of lays out what the other Z-teamers are most likely feeling when it comes to, can I even be a hero? Can I change? Because I don't even know if I can. Am I worthy of forgiveness? Am I worthy of this change at all? She's the one who vocalizes a lot of those questions and a lot of those themes. Now, that being said, she is pushed very hard within the narrative for the romance option. The game definitely wants you to go that route because it allows you to spend more time with her and get to know her more, and then you get to see that arc more. The love story itself also would mirror her overall arc and the Z-Team's overall arc about redemption and forgiveness and becoming better than you were and learning from your mistakes and all of that stuff. But the other great thing about the way that her love story is written is it tells you a lot about her as a character. And I'm not saying you can't understand her as a character if you don't go the romance path, but I think it definitely helps because her whole thing is about being seen. And I know that sounds like a joke because she's the invisible girl, but what I mean is that it's about really being seen. She wants to find someone that's able to look beyond her flaws and see what she can be rather than who she is right now. Someone who has faith in her. That's her biggest want, is to be seen in that way and to be redeemed in that way. And I think that's why it manifests a lot in her feelings for Robert. But it can still be accomplished otherwise. You don't need to romance her in order for her to have a redemption arc. And if anything, if the game had a little more variation in there, it would actually work better because it means that you don't need to be romantically loved in order to be seen and heard and valued by someone else. I think that her twist and her motivations, no matter which path she goes down, makes sense. Obviously, it's a little archetypical or stereotypical for the big reveal to be like, what? The former villain was with the bad guys at the beginning? What? I get that, but I think for the story's not trying to reinvent the wheel most of the time. It does follow a very basic superhero arc, but it works for me. Next up is Blonde Blazer. She is another romance option within the game, and she is meant to be your typical hero. She has the muscle, she has the cape, she has powers that are like Superman adjacent. She's literally dating a guy who's meant to be kind of a Superman stand-in. As you get to know her, you peel back those layers and you learn that there's a lot more to her and that she's actually a very complicated and decently written character. She's not just a symbol. She's not just a corporate hero for SDN, and she's actually a real person behind that mask. Her whole romantic arc is also about being seen, similar to Invisigal, but it's a little different. Instead of her wanting to find someone who sees her for what she can be and sort of the ideal to strive for, like Invisigal, Blonde Blazer wants someone who's able to see her for who she is at her core. She has to put on the great hero face and the I never curse and I say golly and I save kittens out of trees. When all she really wants is someone who's accepting of Mandy, the woman at the core, the woman at the center. I think that's very well written. I think she's very underutilized, though. I know that for me, on my first playthrough, because I didn't romance her, I didn't feel like I spent all that much time with her. While she was around at the office and there were well-written scenes with her, it did feel like she was a little underutilized. Recently, a developer commented that some romantic scenes were cut from the game, and I would personally believe that these would have to do with Blonde Blazer, because her character isn't as directly intertwined with the story of the Z team and improving them and becoming heroes, so they were kind of cut for pacing so they didn't feel so out of left field. But I actually think that was a mistake. I think her arc of wanting to be seen at her core and kind of wanting to be seen beyond the symbol that is Blonde Blazer actually fits pretty well in with them, and it kind of, I think, a more fleshed out story with her would involve the Z team getting to know and getting to see that, hey, to be a hero, you don't have to be perfect. At the end of the day, even Blonde Blazer is just a human being. Next up is the Z team, and I'm lumping most of the Z team together on this one, simply because you spend a lot of time with them as a group. There's a couple of them that you have one-on-one time with, that mostly being Invisigal, and then there's a few others that I'll get to later, like Sonar and Coop, and then Waterboy and Phenomenon. I have those guys separated because of the choices you make revolving them. But the Z team as a whole is what makes this game really work, in my opinion. If the performances of the Z team weren't endearing and weren't funny and heartfelt and all of those things, this game wouldn't work. If you don't care about the Z team on a basic level, the story doesn't work. And I think they do a great job of putting this team together. The performances are actually surprisingly good. When I heard that we had several YouTubers involved and streamers involved with this game, I was kind of iffy. And that is me being a little stereotypical. I mean, the last time I can think of a YouTuber voicing something in a video game, it's Pyrocynical in Black Mesa, and that was awful. The aliens are running. Oh, sir, we are so fucked. That's my impression. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. With the exception of Jacksepticeye's audio mixing at certain points, I don't know what it is. His audio is not mixed very well into the scene, and it sounds like he's right up to the microphone like this. What was that?
Hey! No, Punch-Up. You're literally fanning the flames right now.
Shit, yeah, you're right. Anyone got a rug?
And I get that. It's because he most likely recorded it remotely for budget reasons and whatever. But it was a little jarring at first, but I got used to it over time. But Jacksepticeye, Moist Critical, all those actors actually did a fantastic job, and I loved the rapport that you built with them as Robert. I think the jokes and the bits that you hear during the dispatch, or even just the little conversations, it doesn't even need to be a joke. The mindless conversations and interactions, such as Vizzy talking to Gollum about how they're gonna play video games later.
Did you get that video I sent you?
Dude, you sent me like 500.
It's the one with the karate though.
Oh fuck, I need to see that right now.
Or if you pair certain Z-teamers together, they have special dialogue because they are closer outside of work. Those kinds of details, as well as just the group scenes in general, the writing, the way they handle these characters, and also the way that they rag on Robert is great. I think the way they kind of bully him and push him around and make fun of him, it works really well because he has to earn his place. They think he's some random dude. They don't realize that he is Mecha Man, like the Mecha Man. And so I think Robert earning his place among the Z team is executed very well, and that's mostly due to the writing and the performances. I also love Flambe and his song. I've had that stuck in my head for like weeks at this point, so thank you for that. With specifically Flambe, I think his little redemption with, once he learns the truth about Mecha Man and all that, I think while it's quick, it does feel real. because I think at the point in the story that it happens, it does feel kind of light at first because he's gone and then he just comes back the next day. But we know that he's a hothead and kind of makes sense within the story. I do think that could have been executed a little better, especially since there's not too much in the way of consequences for like not telling them and things like that. But anyway. Next up is Sonar and Coop. Sonar and Coop are two characters that you have to choose between cutting early on in the dispatch game. It's one of those things where the choice you make minimally impacts the game. It kind of just inserts Coop wherever Sonar would have been and vice versa. It brings me back to The Walking Dead, where you have to choose who to save in the pharmacy, and it kind of winds up not fully mattering. Like, you get a few extra interactions, but that's that. However, I think this was executed a lot better. There was never a point where I felt like it was out of place for this to be Sonar instead of Coop, at least in terms of the Z Team stuff.
Drink for you.
Wait, it's kind of hard for me, but I know it was probably a by the books, bottom line kind of decision, but thanks.
Refill here, Coop?
You don't need to bribe me anymore. I'm in your debt now. If you ever need somebody removed,
I'll keep you in mind.
And I think they do a good job of incorporating them no matter what. And the only thing is, I really think that keeping Sonar is the better of the two options because of just how funny he is. I think he fits within the group dynamic very, very well. And the other thing is that Coop works so well as a genuinely scary and intimidating antagonist. Granted, it's because she looks scarier and she has knives and all this and that, like, it is scary. But I think the way that she's written, the way she's reincorporated into the story as a villain later on, works really well. I'm not saying it doesn't work for Sonar. For Sonar, it's meant to be more of that he was duped into this whole thing. And the nice thing is you can bring either one of them back into the team at the very end of the story. And I really, really like that because, once again, fits into the themes of forgiveness and justice and all that. And if you wanted to go the anti-hero route and like kill Shroud and do all that stuff, yeah, you can, like, kick him out or whatever. But the intended arc, I guess you could say, it works very well for that. Next is Waterboy and Phenomaman. I have also lumped these two together because you choose who to add to the Z team, and it's between these two. And I think they both work well. It's a similar way to how Coop and Sonar are kind of split up. However, I do think, this is just my opinion, I do think Phenomaman is kind of underutilized in both ways. Like, it's great to have him come in at the end and you go full circle with the little joke about the watermelon and all this stuff. And it really just comes down to like a personal preference. I think both of them serve the story by bringing them in and helping to build Phenomaman back up and to also build Phenomaboy. To build Waterboy in the first place. I think they both work really well for the overall theme of the story.
Blonde, Miss Blaze, she talked to me. Thanks for picking me. I'm just really just to join you.
Jazzed. The word is jazzed, and we're jazzed to have you too, bud.
Hello, Robert. A moment of your time.
How do you move so quiet?
I float.
If this is about picking you for Z Team, wasn't even a hard decision.
Thank you.
No need. You're a legend. You should be out doing good.
But to do good, you need to be doing good. That's what a human person would say.
Yeah.
And also the way that they're both reincorporated at the end of the story also works fairly well. Next, we're going to get into my overall thoughts about the story. So to start off, the story and the world, I mean, I don't think I've seen a better version of the what if superheroes were real / acted like us kind of trope. This does it better than something like Invincible and something like The Boys, because you're able to have adult humor, but I don't think the gore or the sexual stuff, like there's so much stuff in The Boys that you're just like, oh my god, this is gratuitous, this is over the top. And I like The Boys, don't get me wrong, I've watched all of it. But I like that this was kind of dialed back and felt closer to an actual comic book with mature themes rather than a parody of comic books that The Boys is. I can't really think of any jokes that didn't land for me. I think the jokes were all funny, they were well timed, they were well spread out, and it didn't take away from the dramatic aspects of the story. There was never a point where I didn't feel the weight of the story because of the comedy.
Yep, you got me. I love gobbling on hot, sloppy donuts. Love them from my mouth to my butt. How's it going? First day.
There's a lot of great setup and payoff with the jokes, and the first one that comes to mind is Punch Up and Toxic. If you know, you know. I don't know if I can fully say what he does. I don't know if I can fully say that without getting like demonetized or something, but great setup and payoff. The story does a great job of using comic book stereotypes and using movie superhero stereotypes and not only executing them well, but also subverting them very well. Phenomenon being from another planet and very clearly being a Superman clone reference, whatever, you're completely taken aback when you see him depressed and going through all this stuff after his breakup, and I thought it was not only hilarious, but also fun. Like, it was a well done idea to show, hey, this guy's an alien from another planet. He wouldn't really know all that much about human interaction or the way that things work socially here. And it's a great job of taking that, you see him and you think, oh, okay, so that's Superman. He's just the perfect hero and all this and that. And then you subvert it with that section of the story. I think it's great. And the same kind of for Blonde Blazer. Seeing that there's more to her under the surface and that she's not a symbol of hope and all that, although she can be, but at the end of the day, she's a woman named Mandy who's doing her job. This is where I get into the greatest strength of this game. And that is, obviously, its story, but what about it makes it so strong, in my opinion? And this is going to sound a little crazy, but it's the limited nature of it. Telltale games have always taken the sort of, I believe the term is like railroad kind of path. What I mean by that is something that is on rails has no choice in it. You're going from point A to point B. But something that's a bit more like a railroad, you have switch points. You can go A or B, but A or B still kind of end up in the same spot, just in a different way and with some slight variation. And I think it's actually a great part of this story. And I've actually heard this thrown around as a criticism, so I want to sort of explain why I view it as being the greatest strength of the game. Other Telltale games and story-based games like this do the exact same thing. I think people forget just how little a lot of your choices mattered in The Walking Dead or even in Life is Strange. It's the illusion of choice. And yeah, your choices do matter a little bit, but in Life is Strange, you will always end up having to decide between Chloe and Arcadia Bay. In the first season of The Walking Dead, you will always end up having to decide what happens to Lee. And what this kind of structure does for these games is it allows them to actually have weight behind their story. And what I mean by that is theme, a through line of what is this game about? And it doesn't lose that narrative. Something on the other end of the spectrum would be a game that I talked about a while ago called Lost Records Bloom and Rage. That game had so much variation in what the ending could be and so many different outcomes that the theme of the story and what the story meant as a whole and the story's ability to be satisfying were completely thrown out the window because there was too much choice. There were so many choices that they all wound up feeling like they didn't mean that much. So all of that to say, the fact that the game is linear and has a clear thing to say, I think is why people love the story so much and why I love the story so much, because it feels satisfying. The culmination at the end wouldn't be possible if they really did take into account every little action and then this person's gone forever and then this combination of different things can happen at the end. Because it comes down to two major choices or two major outcomes, it makes it feel like it has a much larger impact, and it works well. And this is something that is seen throughout all aspects of the story. The illusion of choice and the illusion of the impact that aids the overall theme and the overall story in the end, like the RNG in the dispatching game itself. And that's not to say that your choices don't matter. Your choices do affect the outcome. It affects your relationships with all the characters, it affects the dialogue, it affects many, many different things. But it's not an earth-shattering change that completely throws away what the story was meant to be. It finds itself perfectly in the middle. It gives you enough agency, but also not too much that you lose the narrative. And that's why I have such an appreciation for the writing of this game. Just imagine how The Walking Dead would spiral out into different directions if your choices like really, really, really mattered. You know what I mean? Or even Life is Strange. Really, a lot of games are on rails like that, and some of them do it better than others, and I think this is an example of doing it really well. Because a game with true freedom lacks a real message and a real through line with its story. I also love the ending sequence. The battle is epic, the animations look beautiful, and especially if you get one of the more positive endings, the culmination of all these different characters returning and the way that they're incorporated, all of that ending with the final choice of do you kill Shroud or not, it just works well. It just works so well. I think it's fantastic. Because one of the things I like that they don't really touch on as much is that the reason the Z team is the key to defeating Shroud is because despite Shroud's ability to calculate outcomes and calculate all these different things, at the end of the day, the one thing he never accounted for was the redemption of these people. He never in a million years considered that somebody like Invisigal could turn herself around and take a bullet for Robert, or that this crazy team of former villains could turn their lives around and decide to dedicate themselves to protecting people. And it's really a great story in the end. I think that's a theme that's been explored in other movies before. It's basically just the power of friendship, to be honest. But I think this is a great execution of the power of friendship kind of theme. In the end, I think both romances work. However, like I said, Invisigal's romance is heavily pushed. And as I mentioned, it seems that a lot of romantic scenes, at least from the way the developer made it sound, were cut. And I believe they must be related to Blonde Blazer. And I imagine it was for pacing. I think the game was, the episodes were pretty short, and I would have liked to have seen more. However, I think in the end, it's kind of like with movies where you want to be left excited and wanting more rather than being bored out of your mind because there's too much. I think all of the endings work and all of them have weight to them and the different variations within those endings. Obviously, I think the best ending is Invisigal becoming a hero and Robert sparing Shroud, because that is what falls in line the most with what I think the intentional themes are of the story. The reason I say best ending is because I think a lot of these games have very clear endings of like, this is the good ending, this is the bad ending. And other games try to leave it a little more ambiguous, such as Life is Strange, where players debate back and forth what is the better ending. In this case, though, I think because of the type of story this is, a story about redemption and basically kind of a Suicide Squad kind of deal, where it's like, we can be more than just former villains and all that, I think it's clear that if this were a TV show, the ending would be Invisigal turns her life around, saves Robert, and then all that stuff. There is a limited number of endings. There's really only 2 endings. The one I just mentioned where Invisigal turns things around and then you choose whether or not to spare or kill Shroud. And then a version where Invisigal turns into a villain, kills Shroud, and sort of takes the mask. I like that those are the 2 main endings because it feels earned. When you have too many variations to an ending in a video game, it can feel like you can sometimes feel confused as to how you got there, whether that's a development issue or the story issue. I think these games having around 2 to 3 different endings is probably the best. because it allows them to each feel earned, and for the writers to focus on, okay, well, we need to make sure the options that happen fit in thematically and feel satisfying either way. And the other thing is, I'm glad Vizzy's redemption is not directly tied to her romance, because you are able to redeem her without being with her, that kind of thing. However, she does feel very forced at times, and that's going to lead me to some of the problems with this game and how its linear nature can be its biggest weakness as well. Before I get into the bigger problem with Invisigal that is because of that kind of railroad nature of the game, I'm going to discuss another issue that people have had with it, and that would be the overall adult comments, the aggressive flirting, the sexual content towards Robert that occur throughout the game. The biggest one being like the underwear bit with Mal, where she kind of, smacks at him in his underwear. Some people have gone as far as to call that like sexual assault or harassment, and people are reacting very strongly to it. People going as far as to call it sexual assault. I think in the case of like Invisigal in particular, her whole thing is it's meant to be an unwanted advancement, but we'll get to that in a second. And I just want to clarify, this is coming from someone who understands what both of those things feel like. I've been through both of those things. So I'm not here to invalidate your opinion or how you feel about it. It's a perfectly valid reaction to be uncomfortable with sexual content or things like that within this game. I'm just looking to hopefully explain it and the intentions from the developers. So to start with Mal and the general jokes, I think that these aren't meant to be malicious. We have to remember, these characters are written to be reformed villains. The last thing they're going to be thinking about is boundaries. They're going to overstep them. They're going to mess around with their friends however they'd like to, especially their boss, who's a normal human. It's like, what's he going to do about it? I'll mess with him, call him names, whatever. And I think what people need to remember is that characters like Deadpool make jokes and interactions like this all the time. Whether it's Deadpool aggressively flirting with Spider-Man, or exposing himself to other characters, or inappropriately touching another character, it's always played for laughs, and people laugh at it because it's Deadpool. It's absurd. There are similar jokes within The Boys. Now, I want to clarify with The Boys, I am not talking about the scene with Huey and the shapeshifter. That is sexual assault, flat out. There is no debate about that. He was not able to fully consent because he was a shapeshifter. Done. That is a very clear thing. But beyond that, there are jokes within the shows, mostly directed at Huey or at other characters of that nature that people laugh at. And I think what we need to remember, this is not an endorsement of these actions. Nobody here is saying that's okay. That's why they're reforming villains. They used to be these awful people, and now they're trying to grow and change and that kind of thing. It's meant to be just ridiculous. It's meant to be absurd. You're supposed to be like, oh my god, really? Which is what the intention of those scenes are in Dispatch. Now we're going to talk about the Invisigal scene in the locker room, which has been a major point of contention. People have directly called that one sexual assault, as I mentioned, and I read it differently. I think it's a desperate move, and then she's rejected, and then she goes away. But that doesn't change that people are uncomfortable because of it, and I'd like to kind of dive into that and explain why. And I think the reason why people have such a strong reaction to it is actually, it's a very reasonable thing, and it comes down to the strength of the game, or in this case, the biggest weakness of the game, and that being its sort of railroaded structure. The thing with this scene is it is scripted. No matter what, she will attempt to come on to Robert in the locker room, and I think that is why it makes people so uncomfortable, and why people have gone as far as to label it as sexual assault. This is the trouble with story-based games. If you have an intended arc or through line, it can be difficult to fully execute that with those branching paths and having to account for how players feel. You risk losing the story with so much freedom, as I mentioned earlier, but you also risk creating a rift between the player and the story. I think it was very clear that the intention with Invisigal and Blonde Blazer was more of a love triangle rather than you just pick one and stick with them. I think you were meant to be a little more conflicted between the two throughout the game. This is once again backed up by the idea that certain romantic scenes were cut out. You would have gotten more opportunities to really get to know each of them. I think Robert is written to be generally interested in both Blazer and Invisigal. We know that from the choices themselves, the fact that they even show up. But that's the problem. That's how Robert is written. When people play video games, they often imagine themselves as the protagonist. When they play a game that has choices like these, they think to themselves, okay, what would I do? Who am I going to romance? That kind of thing. In a game like Fallout, where you create your own character from scratch and they are a completely blank slate, it works well. You're able to literally play as yourself if you'd like to. But in a narrative game where the character that you're playing as has motivations and feelings and ideas that are different than the player, it can cause disconnect in scenes like these. A good example I could think of is people who play Life is Strange 1 and want nothing to do with the romance between Chloe and Max. They might feel uncomfortable with certain comments that Chloe makes, or the scene where Chloe, asks to kiss her and things like that. That can feel weird if in your brain you've decided that outright. Whereas Max, who is canonically bisexual and has the options to be with her, would most likely just be fine with that and maybe even go with that. It just depends on how you want to play your Max, because you're not playing yourself. But all that to say, it's what creates this disconnect. And so for those who are dead set on Blonde Blazer from the get-go, it directly conflicts with this scene for Vizzy that's meant to be part of this back and forth conflict where Robert doesn't know who to go with. Maybe he's unintentionally or intentionally flirting with both, who knows? And that's why it's so uncomfortable, because people think, well, I only want Blazer. I've only gone after Blazer. Why is she coming on to me? That makes me uncomfortable. Whereas I think the intention was an uncomfortable advance, maybe a miscommunication at worst, or at best, a desperate and semi-romantic moment. This is also not to excuse the developers. I'm not saying they're completely guiltless in this. When it comes to writing these kinds of games, you have to pick and choose the hill you want to die on. Things in the game that need to stay for the sake of the overall story, and then things that can change or be altered based on player action to make them feel like they have a lot of agency. This is not one of those hills to die on. I think it should have absolutely been accounted for if a player wasn't interested in Invisigal at all. Maybe at the most she puts her hand on his shoulder, or tries to hold his hand, or maybe goes in for one kiss and you have the opportunity to stop her before she even gets close. It's clear that they wanted the love triangle, but it seems that they forgot to account for the fact that some people either don't want a romantic interest at all or are dead set on one or the other from the get-go, and it winds up creating this uncomfortable feeling. So to summarize, the problem with those scenes and the uncomfortable nature of them really just comes down to the kind of game this is and the choice of the developers to die on the hill of wanting you to have some kind of connection, whether you go through with it or not, that's up to you, with Invisigal. But ultimately, I think they chose the wrong hill to die on, leading to this massive amount of conflict within the fan base and that uncomfortable feeling with it. But I don't think it was intended to come off the way that some people are taking it. But like I said at the beginning, that doesn't change the way it made people feel, and it can be uncomfortable for those people. And it's one of those moments that would have worked in a TV show. If this was fully linear and there was no player choice and you were able to have the back and forth, I don't think it would be seen as a huge issue because of what the intention is. But because you have agency within this story, having that be a set, done deal kind of thing that always happens is kind of weird. And that kind of brings me to my next criticism, is that I felt like at points this would have worked very well as a TV show. I'm not saying it was bad and it shouldn't be a video game. I think in the end it does a great job, and they do just occasionally choose that bad hill to die on, and it kind of messes with things. But the overall aspect, I think it's great. But there were moments like that where I thought to myself, this would be a fantastic TV show. I would watch this as a TV show because I could see what the writers wanted to do if they had the ability to just be like, this is what's going to happen. My other criticism is like the QTEs. I kind of mentioned this during the gameplay, and I've kind of mentioned my criticisms as I've gone. I just think that I wish the QTEs had weight to them in that there was at least a fail screen of some kind, but you know. I only encountered a handful of glitches, mainly towards the end of the game, where in that final dispatching call thing, whatever, it did kind of wig out for me at times. I play story-based games on a controller, so I don't know if it was just me on controller, but it felt like it was giving me all sorts of trouble when I was trying to select things. So that brings us to the end of the review, where I'm going to kind of summarize my thoughts and then... yeah, we'll get out of here. I've been recording for 1 hour and 19 minutes at this point, so hopefully the video has kept your retention. If you've made it this long, like and subscribe and blah, blah, blah. I don't know why. I'm channeling my inner Phenomaman. Phenomaman tells you to like and subscribe.
You can count on SDN to help lift the burdens life throws at us. Let SDN be your rock, so you can rock.
I'm tired. I don't know why I'm doing voices today. So overall, this game has well-written characters, well-acted characters. The limited gameplay that is there is great, and it's fun. I think it builds on top of itself without ever jumping too hard in the difficulty. And I think the way that they implement new gameplay factors works really, really well. The dispatching game itself is actually pretty addictive, and I'd love to have like even a mobile game of it. I think that would be really fun. You get like assigned a bunch of random heroes and all this and that. Anyway, and finally, the greatest strength and the biggest weakness of this game is its very clear themes and very well-written through line for its story. This kind of weakness that comes with having such a strong narrative within a choice-based game comes with the territory. The railroad style of gaming is about picking and choosing your battles, and your battles being what does the player really have control over. And I would say for this game, for the most part, they pick the right ones. When it works really well. But when it doesn't work, it falls flat on its face and makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I know that basically saying that the game does the illusion of choice really well sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I would say the same for Life is Strange, The Walking Dead. They do a great job of picking and choosing their battles. And it allows them to have just enough choice, just enough agency, as well as just enough structure that the endings feel satisfying and feel like a great conclusion to this narrative. Despite the issues that I mentioned, I think that this is one of the best games that we've seen in this genre in a long, long time. The story is intense, funny, heartfelt, gripping. It's everything you'd want out of a superhero story and has a great positive theme at the end, even despite its adult and sometimes dark sequences. I would say it's absolutely worth your time. Even if you've gotten a bunch of stuff spoiled from me in this review because you watched it and you're great, and I thank you, I would still recommend playing it because I scratched the surface when it came to certain aspects of the game. So I would highly recommend it. Before I give the final number score, I'm going to quickly explain again how my reviewing scale works. If I give something a 5 out of 10, that doesn't mean it's awful. That means that it is just fine. It's directly in the middle. It's meh. Something like a 6 would be slightly above average, 7 would be very above average, 8 would be kind of a B+, and then go from there. Which is why I'm very happy to say that in my opinion, despite the flaws, despite the issues, I'm going to give this game a 9 out of 10 on my personal scale. I really hope they're able to do a season 2 because, yeah, it would be really, really cool. So if you stuck around for this long, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought about certain points of the video in the comments below. I'm more than willing to hear other opinions and ideas. You might even see me down there replying and talking to people. So thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. And thanks for sticking around so long. And I hope you have a good morning or evening or, you know, whatever.
Bitch, my name's Robert, such a bitch whose name is Robert. I'm a bitch, yeah, I'm a bitch. I'm such a fucking bitch. I have no hopes, I have no dreams. And a tiny little thing, and it doesn't even function anyway. Because every record is function.